can begin to fit into a contemporary mold. So I'm now going to start the program by handing over for welcoming remarks, first by Elizabeth Sidiropoulos, our Chief Executive at SAIA, and then followed by His Excellency Salman Al-Farisi, Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to South Africa. So I'll hand over to Elizabeth.
Great, thank you very much, Yushen. It's great to see you and the fellow panelists here this morning. Let me first recognize the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia, with whom we have this partnership of the book launch this morning, Ambassador Al-Farisi. It's good to be working with you, and thank you for the opportunity of having this very important dialogue and discussion. Secondly, of course, it's good to also see Ambassador Anil Suklal with us this morning. It's good to see you, as I said, even though it's virtually. And so thank you very much for making the time this morning. And then old friends and some new friends on the panel. I'm really looking forward to what is going to be, I think, a very interesting and important discussion. The celebration of a quarter of a century of official relations, diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa really belies the much longer historical relationship from colonial times to the post-Second World War decolonization. And of course, who can forget the very important Bandung Conference, where an ANC delegation participated, of course, not the apartheid state, but South Africa, in that sense, was there at the creation. When South Africa returned to the fold to the international fold in 1994, it also took up its position as an important player in the global South, with its multilateral engagement focusing on the global inequities and the need for a stronger African, but also very importantly, global South agenda in the international space. And this is an area clearly where that Indonesia has also occupied, and where I think we have found common interests and common trajectories. We are both important regional partners in our own right. We're also in the global context, so-called middle powers, in terms of our engagement in multilateral fora. And very, very critically, South-South cooperation is at the center of many of the way in which we see the world and the way in which we undertake many of our engagements. And dare I, lest I forget, of course, our participation and role in the Indian Ocean Rim Association, where again, in the context of the shifting economic and political space, the Indian Ocean Rim is developing into a community where I think Indonesia and South Africa are playing very important roles. So over the last 25 years, the official bilateral relations have grown. I think there is much scope for greater engagement, politically, economically, and people to people. And I think this book that is about a South-South partnership captures and creates an opportunity for us to have a conversation about how we deepen and take forward this relationship, both bilaterally, but I think also critically at the global level, given where we are in this particular time in the world's history. So I look forward to the conversations. Thank you again very much to the cooperation with the Embassy of Indonesia here in South Africa. And let me welcome you all, and let me hand over back to our moderator. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can I please just remind everyone to please mute your microphones thank you, if you are not speaking. I am now going to hand over to His Excellency Ambassador Al-Farisi, who is a career diplomat and is currently the ambassador to South Africa, as well as accredited with Botswana, Lesotho, and Eswatini. Ambassador, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yuzenwu, our moderator for this event. Thank you also to Dr. Elizabeth Sidiropoulos, the Chief Executive of SAIA, for the very substantive opening remarks. My dear brother, Ambassador Anil Suklal, the Deputy Director General of Asia and the Middle East of DIRCO. My colleague, Dr. Siswo Pramono, the Director General of the Policy Analysis and Development Agency of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Distinguished panelists and writers of the book, Dr. Gabriel in Botswana, the reviewer of this book, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and all participants in this webinar, wherever you may be. Good morning to you all, and also good afternoon to those in the other part of the ocean. May you always be safe and healthy indeed. First of all, may I take this opportunity to convey my sincere appreciation to all parties that have been involved in the making of the book entitled Indonesia-South Africa, a South-South partnership in the making. Indeed, I should thank and appreciate to your crucial contribution that this book is now poised to enrich the collection of reference about the relationship between Indonesia and South Africa. Secondly, may I also convey my deepest gratitude to SAIA for their professional assistance in convening this important event and making this collaboration a success. Ladies and gentlemen, this book is published to commemorate the 25th anniversary on the establishment of diplomatic relation between Indonesia and South Africa, which was to take place last year in 2019. However, bonds between Indonesia and South Africa has been long established when our history records that many Indonesians, including religious leaders, were exiled to the Cape for their part of resistance toward the colonial power invasion in many parts of Indonesia. From that point onward, relationship between Indonesia and South Africa has gone through various milestones. Among others, the mutual support for liberation struggle, as highlighted by the 1955 Bandung Conference, which was attended by the representative from African National Congress, ANC, as well as the establishment of diplomatic relation between Indonesia and South Africa in 1994. Many chapters in this book will tell us the story of how relationship between Indonesia and South Africa grew over the years. However, I believe that both countries are not satisfied enough with those achievements just yet. Therefore, we should look beyond what we have done and turn this long-standing relationship into mutually beneficial partnership. That is why the book also offers interesting perspective from the contributors on how Indonesia and South Africa could intensify the relationship in the future and explore areas whereas both countries could grow together, which I believe will be very intriguing for the readers. Through this virtual book launch event, I firmly believe that it could provide the platform for us to discuss further and into details about the past, present, and future outlook of the relationship between the two countries, as we always welcome constructive opinions and ideas for the enhancement of our bilateral relation. Last but not least, I hope the book as well as this webinar will further enrich the public with knowledge on relation between Indonesia and South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I am now going to hand over to our keynote, His Excellency Dr. Anil Suklal, the DDG for Asia and Middle East at DIRCO. Ambassador, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Dr. Wushan. My good friend, His Excellency Pa Salman Al-Farisi, my colleague from SIA, Professor Elizabeth Siridipoulos, and all other eminent
Ambassador, I think you've muted yourself.
No, I'm not on mute. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we hear you.
Let me firstly extend the apologies of Dr. Pando, who could not be available this morning and asked me to represent her, but also to extend congratulations on this very important occasion, marking the 25th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa. Let me thank the embassy and especially Ambassador Al-Farisi and SIA for getting together in putting together this very important publication. I think it's very important that we document the history of our relations, and this book is a most welcome addition to South Africa's foreign policy since our democracy. I want to congratulate all of the authors for the excellent articles contributed to this document. Let me say that my presentation this morning is going to be based on my own personal experience in being responsible for relations between South Africa and Indonesia since 2000. Over these past 20-some years, I've been very privileged to be part of bilateral meetings and part of state and official visits to Indonesia under three different presidents, under President Mbeki, President Zuma, and President Ramaphosa. I've been equally privileged to be parting to meetings under President Megawati Sukarnoputri, under President Bambang Yudhoyono, and under President Joko Widodo. Likewise, I've sat in on meetings under your excellent foreign ministers, Mr. Hassan Virayuda, Mr. Martin Natalgawa, and of course, most recently, Madam Retno Masudi. So I'm going to draw on my personal experience over the past 20 years, but I should add that my relationship with Indonesia, your history and culture, goes back to my undergraduate days at the University of Durban, Westville, when I was a student of Oriental history and science of religion, when I was introduced to the dynamic history of Indonesia and the life of Sheikh Yusuf and Tuan Guru and the contribution to Islam in South Africa. I think it's important for us to go back to Bandung, 1955, and the very important role that President Sukarno played in bringing together the nations of the world that were newly emerged out of colonization, together with other very important leaders from Asia and Africa. Bandung is important for the history of South Africa and Indonesia for the fact that you provided the African National Congress and by extension, the South African liberation struggle, a platform to internationalize South Africa's struggle for democracy and freedom. And the attendance by Molvi Kachalia and Moses Kotane at the Bandung conference and the fact that they were embraced by the conference and the message of South Africa's struggle was embraced by the Asia-Africa Summit was an important point in South Africa's liberation politics. Equally important, it provided a platform to both Molvi Kachalia and Moses Kotane to meet with heads of delegation like Zhou Enlai of China, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru of India, President Sukarno of Indonesia, and the other very eminent leaders from the 29 countries that converged in Bandung. I also want to thank you for focusing this publication on South-South cooperation. And I believe in our post-democracy period, Indonesia and South Africa have been solid partners in forging the agenda of the South together. And I'm going to draw on the various experiences where I have been personally involved, representing South Africa in this partnership, not just at the bilateral level. I think the book captures very eloquently the very strong bilateral relations between Indonesia and South Africa, the friendship that existed between Madiba and President Sukarno and the president of Indonesia, even during his period of incarceration. And the mere fact that you had visits from both these presidents to their respective countries soon after Madiba was released from prison shows the solidarity and strength of this relationship. But I think why Bandung is important. Bandung was the template that set the scene for South-South cooperation. It was a very important meeting that charted the role of the countries of the South to come together for common aspirations and to ensure that we work together in achieving a more equitable global order. I think it's also important that we reflect on South-South cooperation today in this seminar, given what is happening to the agenda of the South. The agenda of the South is being increasingly marginalized globally. And there are various factors for this. And in a post-COVID era, we'll have to relook this template, given that increasingly a number of developing countries are becoming economically powerful and new alliances are being formed with the global north that sometimes is at the expense of the global South agenda. So I say this having participated in meetings of the G20 and also in our own meetings and seeing what is happening. I think we need to be mindful of this and see how we regenerate the spirit, the 10 Sila principles that were adopted in Bandung that are equally important today as it was then. I think as a starting point, I want to go back to 2002. In July 2002, South Africa assumed the chairship of the newly launched African Union, in Durban, my home city. And when we became chair of the African Union, I put forward the idea to then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Zuma, that President Mbeki should go and address the ASEAN summit. We spoke to the ASEAN group of ambassadors in Pretoria, looking at the possibility of inviting President Mbeki to the summit in November in Cambodia, which was then chair of ASEAN. And we were told this hasn't happened in the history of ASEAN, where you had a leader from outside the region address the summit. But together with the support of Indonesia and the other ASEAN nations, we succeeded in getting President Mbeki invited to the ASEAN summit on the 4th and 5th of November in Cambodia. I was very privileged to be part of that delegation. I still recall Minister Zuma asking me, why do you want President Mbeki to go and address the summit? And I stressed the importance of ASEAN and the important role that some of the ASEAN countries like Indonesia played in bringing Asia and Africa together. And as a new democracy, we should reignite the spirit of South-South solidarity. It was at the ASEAN summit where President Mbeki stressed the need for closer cooperation between ASEAN and Africa. And I think it was a very important moment in that history of South-South cooperation, the speech that President Mbeki made there. I want to quickly quote what he said during that input at the summit. We are also convinced that beyond the partnership among Africans, the partnership between Africa and the developed North, of critical importance is also the partnership with the countries of the South, prominent amongst which are the ASEAN countries. It is our earnest belief that multi-regional cooperation and stronger all-round relations among the peoples of the South increases not just the volume of our collective voice, but the quality of this voice, adding the appropriate and necessary weight to our broad call for a just and equitable world order. This was in 2002. And it was during this visit that South Africa contemplated the idea of a formal relationship between ASEAN and Africa, or between ASEAN and SADC, or either between ASEAN and South Africa. We are at a historical moment in this relationship. An idea that germinated in Cambodia in 2002 is finally coming to fruition. Last week, Minister Pandor signed the instruments of accession for South Africa to accede to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation with ASEAN, becoming the first sub-Saharan African country to accede to this treaty. Minister Pandor would have physically gone to Vietnam in November this year to sign that treaty. But unfortunately, because of the COVID, it's a virtual summit, and South Africa will accede to the TAC in November this year, thus formalizing a relationship, the idea of which germinated during President Mbeki's visit to Cambodia for the ASEAN summit. But equally important, it was at this summit, after President Mbeki spoke, that President Megawati Sukarnoputri, when she took the floor, and during her intervention, she indicated that Indonesia is going to be marking the 50th anniversary of the Bandung summit in 2005. And she, from the floor, called upon South Africa and invited President Mbeki to partner Indonesia in commemorating the event. As a result of this call by President Megawati, in January 2003, she sent a special envoy to South Africa in the form of the very able former foreign minister, Ali Alatas. I was part of that preparation. Ali Alatas came to South Africa in January 2003 carrying a letter from President Sukarnoputri. That letter formally invited South Africa to become the co-chair of the 50th anniversary of the Bandung celebrations. That letter also further stipulated that in preparations for the 50th anniversary summit, that we will have two preparatory conferences, one in Indonesia and one in South Africa. And in July 2003, we convened the first of what came to be known as the Asia-Africa Sub-Regional Organization Conference, ASROC 1. I was privileged to be the co-chair of the senior officials meeting of that event. And between 2003 and 2005, I had the privilege of visiting Indonesia many times. Over the past 20 years, I've lost count. I think I've been to Indonesia over 20 times. My most recent visit being in December last year to participate in the Bali Democracy Forum and co-chair the bilateral senior officials meeting with my colleague, Pa Desra Peschaya. So we convened ASROC 1 in Jakarta in July of 2003. And ASROC 2 was convened in South Africa in March of 2004. Again, I had the privilege of co-chairing that meeting with my colleague, the distinguished ambassador, Pa Makarim Wisibono. I think, Pa, you will recall Pa Makarim, who has had a distinguished career in your foreign ministry and one of your most senior diplomats. The purpose of both the ASROC conferences was to prepare the documents for the summit. It was not just going to be a summit to commemorate the anniversary, but to set a new template of cooperation between Africa and Asia and revitalize the Bandung spirit of creating a better world and a more equitable world and bringing the countries of the South together in one voice in championing the needs of the South, especially the developing needs on the global stage. We went to Bandung in 2005 and President Mbeki co-chaired the summit together with President Bambang Yudhoyono. This was preceded by a foreign ministers meeting. We had over 80 countries in attendance in Bandung in 2005, and mostly at the heads of state or head of government level. It was a very vibrant meeting, the first day of which took place in Jakarta, and the actual commemoration took place in Bandung in the very hall where 50 years earlier, the leaders of Asia and Africa historically met to set the template, as I said, for South-South cooperation, and also set the template for the non-aligned movement, because it was out of here in Bandung in 1955 that at the Ceylon conference in 1956, the NAM Charter was signed leading up to the first NAM summit in 1961. So in terms of South-South cooperation, Indonesia and South Africa has played a very important role in revitalizing the spirit of South-South cooperation. And 10 years later, again in 2015, Indonesia and South Africa was to come together, because in 2005, we not only commemorated the 50th anniversary of Bandung, but we launched a new initiative, the NASP, the New Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership, which set out a template for cooperation between Asia and Africa, taking into account the already very vibrant relations that existed between many African countries and Asian countries, like the FOCAC, like the TCAG, like the India-Africa Summit, and so forth, bringing all of these into one fold under the New Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership. And as we approached the 60th anniversary of Bandung, again, we were asked by Indonesia to come in as co-chair to commemorate this event. And in 2015, we again traveled to, this time, Jakarta, to celebrate the 60th anniversary. And again, I had the privilege of co-chairing the preparatory senior official meeting, working with Pa Desra Percaya on this meeting. And unfortunately, because of domestic commitments, President Zuma could not attend this meeting, and Deputy President Ramaphosa led the South African delegation, and together with President Joko Widodo, co-chaired the 60th anniversary summit preparation and the 10th anniversary of the New Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership. I'm not going to go into the details of the outcome documents. There were substantial documents produced in 2005 and 2015 in terms of the Bandung process and revitalizing and re-energizing the Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership. And again, Indonesia and South Africa was at the forefront of these initiatives. Having said that, I want to briefly also touch on what Elizabeth spoke of, the cooperation we have within the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Indonesia and South Africa were founding nations of the IORA. When the first ministerial took place in 1997, Indonesia was amongst the group of initiating countries to launch this important event. And again, as we expand the horizons and cooperation of IORA, IORA is now well established. I want to refer to a very important historic occasion where Indonesia and South Africa worked again together in hosting this very important meeting. During Indonesia's tenure of chair of IORA between 2015 and 2017, South Africa was the vice chair. And Indonesia put forward the idea of commemorating the 20th anniversary of the founding of IORA and proposed the first ever summit meeting of IORA leaders. And South Africa warmly supported this. Again, I was privileged to work with Pa Desra on the preparatory meetings. Indonesia chaired the preparatory meetings for the Concord, or the political declaration, and I chaired the preparatory meetings for the first IORA Plan of Action 2015-2017. And we had the first summit in March 2017 in Jakarta, at which President Zuma was present as the deputy chair of IORA, and it was chaired by President Joko Widodo. Again, it was a very important moment in South-South cooperation, because as we can see, the ocean space is taking center stage today in the geopolitical sphere. The concept of the Indo-Pacific is gaining global currency. And within IORA, we have brought this concept to the fore. In ASEAN, it's already been adopted, and you have an ASEAN position on it. Within IORA, we are working on an IORA position on the Indo-Pacific. But I want to recall that this is not a new concept. As early as 1953, the first vice president of Indonesia, Muhammad Hatta, put forward a very important document, the Two Ocean Strategy, which speaks of cooperation between the Indian and the Pacific nations. So again, within IORA, I believe Indonesia and South Africa are playing an important role in advancing the agenda of the South. Finally, in terms of the agenda of the South, I want to quickly touch on our cooperation within the G20. As G20 members, we are both members also of the EMDCs, the Emerging Market and Developing Countries group within the G20, where Indonesia and South Africa are one of the 10 countries that participate regularly prior to every Sherpa meeting in working together. I've worked closely with Pa Rizal Lukman, the G20 Sherpa, during my tenure as South Africa's G20 Sherpa. And we have had, inevitably, we would always have a bilateral meeting with Indonesia to ensure that we collaborate and work together in advancing the agenda of the South, especially within the development working group and within the EMDC group, to ensure that as countries of the South, that we advance the agenda of the South within the G20 agenda. I have not touched here on the numerous state visits that I've been party to, accompanying President Mbeki, accompanying President Zuma, accompanying President Ramaphosa, as well as the numerous bilateral meetings I've had the privilege to sit in. Those are also replete with details of the strength and warmth and cooperation of this very vibrant and dynamic relationship. And I believe that Indonesia and South Africa must continue on this dynamic path in safeguarding the interest of the South and championing the interest of the South on the global stage, especially in this day and age where multilateralism is coming on the threat and the rise of unilateralism and populism. I believe the spirit of Bandung that our founding leaders echoed and as encapsulated in the spirit of the Dasa Sila of Bandung are equally important today for Asia and Africa, for Indonesia and South Africa. And it is important that we continue working in tandem. This is a dynamic relationship. Yes, it's a close historical relationship. We have a shared history of struggle and of liberation. We have a shared history where we share our people that have come from Indonesia and settled in South Africa and made South Africa their home. But we have not capitalized sufficiently on this dynamic relationship. We need to continue expanding and revitalizing and re-energizing, not just the bilateral relationship, but also on the multilateral front and especially as global South partners. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of my recollections of what has been for me a tremendous journey being associated with Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your input. I think especially for highlighting how we are, but could still do more in regenerating Bandung principles in today's context. So thank you for that. I am now going to, before we go into the presentations and review of the book, just a bit of housekeeping. We will be providing a link to the book if you have not had a chance to look at it in the chat section of the Zoom application. You are also welcome to submit your questions and comments. We would prefer you use the Q&A tab for that throughout the presentations, and I will then field them for the Q&A session. So in the interest of time, and I think to avoid taking us away from the content discussions, I am now going to briefly introduce all the presenters and the reviewer in the order of the program, just briefly. And if you'd like to read more about them, you can go to the invite reminder that was sent out, I think, yesterday or this morning. So first up, we will have Professor Mohamed Haran, who is with the University of Botswana. He is a professor of religious studies and is also currently an associate researcher at the University of Stellenbosch. And he happens to also be a co-editor of the book that we are discussing today. Second, we'll have Dr. Sizwe Pramano. He is currently Director General, Head of Policy Analysis and Development Agency at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. We will then have Professor Dirk Coetzee, who is Professor in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa. This will then be followed by Mr. Ibrahim Patel, who is Honorary Consul of the Republic of Indonesia in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, and is also Managing Director of Siya Technologies. Following that, we will have our reviewer, who will be Professor Gabriel Faimau. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Professor Faimau is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology at the University of Botswana. He is also visiting associate professor at the Botswana International University of Science and Technology, and also an extraordinary researcher at the Northwest University in South Africa. So now I'm going to hand over to Professor Mohammed Haran, and you all have about 10 minutes for your presentations. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Yoshan, for that introduction. And let me start off by saying and expressing my gratitude to the embassy for basically bringing me on board. I have an interest in international relations. My PhD has been in that arena. And in fact, prior to having brought on board to do this edited work, I had completed a book on Malaysia-South Africa relations. So in a sense, it was basically in my sort of interest to basically pursue this. And so let me express my thanks to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Indonesia, Salman Al-Farisi, for this opportunity, and also particularly for his colleague, Minister Councillor Ardea Erlanga Arbi, for having basically touched base with me to basically bring me on board. So for all of you, really, I would not have basically been able to contribute in this way if it had not been for yourself approaching me. Having said that, let me basically say that this particular text, and of course, and try to also connect with what Ambassador Suklal had just sort of so eloquently sort of shared with us, and I think it's by time that he should also put pen to paper, because I think that's an important narrative that he needs to share with us, which we haven't really read or heard in any of the journals as such, if I'm not mistaken. So in a sense, it sort of helps to capture and contextualize all the other little efforts that we have read or seen. Having said that, I think when we look at this particular publication, we try to look at sort of two-dimensional. The one is the state-state sort of relations, and the other is people-to-people. And I want to sort of elaborate a bit on the people-to-people, the non-state actors dimension that sometimes is very much hidden and off the grid, in other words, off the diplomatic grid, partly for a number of reasons, but also not only in terms of our relation between South Africa and Indonesia, but also generally speaking, it has been off the grid until very recently that international relations specialists decided to look at the role of non-state actors. And for me, these non-state actors have been and are playing and continue to play a very critical and vital role in terms of people-to-people relations. And so for that reason, we have had a section in this particular publication that tried to give voice to the voiceless, so to speak, to those that are not known. But I think it's an issue that sort of we need to explore further, because there are other voices that we haven't managed to, because of the timeline that we had, we couldn't bring them on board, because others came to subsequently inform me that they have a story to tell. So of course these stories can be told, but I think we can look at other opportunities. What the sort of book also tried to lay as a foundation was to stimulate other researchers. And I think perhaps I need to make mention that I only subsequently came to know of Greg Mills and Irma Landi and Wardono's text on Indonesia-South Africa relations, which was published in 1997 in Indonesia. But unfortunately, it's not been sort of very much available. So one could not even sort of look at that and see what they have sort of prepared so that one can build on that. Because after all, our little contributions are all building upon one another. These are all building blocks. And these building blocks enrich our understanding and insight. And in a sense, it should act as an important stimulant for emerging researchers. Now, speaking about emerging researchers, it is my feeling that I think partly, and again connecting with what Ambassador Suklal has sort of outlined, firstly is the issue of ASEAN-SADC relations. The narratives that he mentioned in between about President Mbeki having sort of addressing the ASEAN sort of meeting and so forth, these were great sort of important interventions. But from one's understanding and reading is that these have not been deepened in any way. It has been very superficial. And this is the reason why these type of publications need to help to assist in that pathway. In other words, to basically see that ASEAN and SADC on sort of regionally make that connection via the IOA, via the Indian Ocean Rim sort of connections, but on a more specific bilateral relations where our relations between South Africa and Indonesia also becomes deepened. And these become deepened through our sort of various interaction at different levels, whether trade and commerce, whether just diplomatic levels. But I think it is sort of these that help to reinforce the people to people. And speaking about people to people, let me just mention quickly a project that has been ongoing for the past 2 years on Sheikh Yusuf Al-Makassari. As you know, he was exiled to the Cape via Ceylon, Sri Lanka, to the Cape, and he died here. Although he didn't write any manuscripts here, but what is important that he has written lots of manuscripts that focus on mystical dimensions or Sufi dimensions. And as a result of his writings, a team of people got together and they've translated most of his text into English, and it was just published by the University of South Africa. For me, that particular project is a spin-off of these type of relationships that we have. On the one hand, it basically brings back or reminds us of our own identities, because after all, we have multiple identities, so to speak. I mean, many of us and some of the contributors to this volume from the people to people's section, they could trace their lineage back to their village, to the kampongs back in Indonesia, and that in itself is fascinating. The stories of the one person, Nur Rakib, basically has captured that particular in a very visible manner, and I think we need to appreciate all of these little sort of contributions. So that book on Sheikh Yusuf basically helps to sort of deepen that. Hopefully we are looking at further, but my sort of point which I just want to drive home is that we need to look at our relation holistically, not in sort of through certain vignettes only, not just at commerce, but at other dimensions as well, because they help to take our relationships, South-South relationship, sort of further into the future. Now, let me sort of close by saying the following, that I think from my own understanding and reading and being familiar with the sort of Southeast Asia, generally speaking, is that, and in fact, when I was a visiting lecturer at the University of UKM that in Malaysia, I suggested to the Vice Chancellor then, why not set up a Center for African Studies or SADC Studies, for example. Unfortunately, circumstances did not sort of allow that. The financial sort of meltdown in 1997, 1998, so to speak. And now the question that I would say that maybe it is for Indonesia to take up this. They need to have a center, a dedicated center for SADC studies. Train people in, sort of these countries, and South Africa should do the same. Have a center for ASEAN studies. Now, we heard that Ambassador Suklaw mentioned that he studied at University of Durban Wesel. And I was also there. And what was astounding and what people don't know is that that university had a rich set of works that was not found in anywhere else in Southern Africa. The point which you want to drive home at is that it was a home where South Asian studies, for example, could have been expanded into a lively, unfortunately, of course, the democratic government decided to change the sort of educational sector sort of radically by merging University of Durban Wesel into University of KwaZulu-Natal. Our argument would have been that to have made it an institution that focused on ASEAN, South Asian, and Asian studies. But be that as may, it's not the case. But what we'd like to say as part of the conclusion is that it is by time that we set up these type of centers, like we have at WITS, the Center of Indian studies, why not have a center of ASEAN studies, so that we can train our people and not be dependent on European consultants, because this is part of our problem. We are too Eurocentric instead of being Afrocentric or Asia-centric, so to speak. Let us have an exchange of our own scholars, and in that way build a much more firmer and solid relationship where we have our own advisors, our own consultants, our own people from Southern Africa, people from ASEAN, to basically serve our communities in the interest of our communities, for our communities. And I think our future will be on a much firmer ground than being dependent upon advisors from the United States or advisors from the UK or France or Germany. I think we have the ability, we just need to create an environment where that is so that we have students or future researchers who know Bahasa Indonesia. They must not read through a secondary language. They must be familiar with the cultures. There's not just one Indonesian culture. There's myriads of cultures, and it's having to get to know that. And the reverse is also important, that Indonesian students, Malaysian students, Singaporean students must be familiar with the varied multicultural, multilinguistic, multi-ethnic communities in Southern Africa. If we have that, then I think we will have a much far better relationship, because we appreciate one another's culture. We appreciate one another as peoples, because after all, we live in one global village. We're not living apart. And COVID has basically forced us to basically deal with things differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing also the thinking behind the book, and especially emphasizing, I think, the importance of both the upstairs and downstairs components of the relationship between Indonesia and South Africa. I am now going to hand over to Dr. Swiswa Pramono. The floor is yours.
I have unmuted myself, I think. Thank you very much, Dr. Yu San-Woo. And herewith, I would like to address and thanks to Ms. Elizabeth Sitiro Paulus, Ambassador Alvarizes, and Dr. Anil Suklal, and also Professor Mohammed, that already gave us some entering gateway to the issues. So, if I may, can I share screen with you, because I have some slides just to show. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple of things. I might start with the global overview, and then now is the rise of Asia, and the way we look at Africa is very, very strategic and important. That's why we have the Declaration of Strategic Partnership in 2008 between our two head of state. So now I think it is a time to really implement on what has been written in the strategic partnerships. But the rise of Asia is real. Now Asia is the center of global economics gravity. I think 27 trillion combined GDP processing power parities. And we are going to see, I think the previous speaker is correct. Africa is pretty much close with the Western world. And I think this is normal, because most of the investment coming from European Union. Number two is coming from United States, and then Asia, it's much smaller. So I think it is a time now for Asia and Africa to be more, to have more dialogues and how to improve economic relation in the real terms. So if you see the coloring here, Indonesia and South Africa are more or less in the same color. So we are in the same picture. So the coloring represents how stable is your economy. So it's the the color is blue. This is sustainable economy. Green is stable economy. Now yellow, 3 level of yellow is very dynamic here, and red is some kinds that you still have a lot of homework to do. So Africa has been progressing, less dark red now and more yellow in Africa. This is the same situation with ASEAN. We still have red, for instance, in here, but mostly now we are moving into yellow as well. So my point is that businessmen from Indonesia or businesswomen coming to South Africa, they're not really very surprised because we have the same situation. We have the same colors in terms of state fragility and progress as well. So I think this is one important thing. So if we look at this, we use this method to see how fragile particular countries and how they can already escape or have more progress in becoming less fragile today and in the future. So this is the calculation for the last 15 years. Yeah. So this is South Africa. Yeah. The point is that the more you are going down here, the better you are. So the more you're going up, you are becoming more fragile. If you're in that position, you are less fragile. So Indonesia is moving actually from very fragile into less fragile. And this is Africa. You're stable in this particular score. And this is the other countries in Africa. So I think, again, we are the same color, yellow, and then we have a lot of similarities. Yeah. And this is the way we look at the South Africa and Africa as a whole. So in the last couple of years, I think Asia attention to Africa has been improving. We have China-Africa Summit, we have Japan-Africa Summit, we have India-Africa Forum or Summit, we have Indonesia-Africa Forum last year's and Indonesian-African Infrastructure Dialogue, we have Malaysia, Langkawi Dialogue with Africa, and of course Vietnam-Africa International Forum. So my point is that emerging countries, the South-South relation, I think, really step on more something concrete on the economy. So South Africa against and Indonesia, we are in the same cluster of emerging markets, while frontier market here, this is from the Market Watch, it's mostly other countries. But remember, this frontier market one day will be becoming emerging market. And that's why from the very beginning, most ASEAN countries would like to have a strong relation with Africa to anticipate what will happen in Africa in the next 10 years from now, that Africa will be very, very important for the global economy. So this is what we process from IMF, World Bank, and Brookings. Africa will be source of energy security and food security, leading the global economic growth. Economic growth prediction will be 4.3 on average. That is before COVID situation. Young population, labor forces predicted to be 1.1 billion. So this is all the things that we consider that the importance of Africa for not only Indonesia, but also Asia in general. So I think that the discussion on ASEAN and SADC will be very important. Now, Indonesia is doing study on the possibility of PTA or FTA between Indonesia ECOWAS, Indonesia SADC, and Indonesia COMESA. Yeah, and this is the COVID situation. Yeah, we have a very hard hit now to 2020. Mostly we got minus, for instance. Indonesia has been contracted. Our economy has been contracted like -5 now, and we can see also South Africa being contracted like -X. But next, after the COVID, yeah, we expect the recovery. So for Indonesia will be about 6%, and South Africa will be 3.5%, either in 2021, the end of 2021, or 2022. Yeah, but certainly we know that the impact of the COVID will be lingering with us in the next 5 years. Yeah. But this is the situation now on the severity of the pandemics. Yeah. And this is Americas. The Americas, I think, is very heavily impacted by the pandemic. And this is South Asia, and this is Africa. I think this Africa managed very well. Yeah, less cases than Southeast Asia or the America. So I think we consider this as a factor that's very important to deal more with Africa as the for the future cooperation between Asia and Africa, mostly on the economic sector. Now, and this is from the McKinsey. I think this very interesting chart or map. Yeah. So if you move from here to here, this will be, this part is unstable and this part is stable. Yeah. And this, if you move up here, is high growth or low growth. South Africa is a very big economy, but you are very stable in here, while your growth is not really very high. But this is okay. I think this is in Indonesia we have the old saying like slower but sure. So this is the system there. So next year after the COVID, you are predicted to grow 3.5. This is still much higher than the average of sub-Saharan Africa, 3.4%. This is the prediction of the IMF. Yeah. So this is what happened when we have the Indonesian African Forum last year, 2019. There are a lot of commitment, and mostly we have projects in the stable growers, yeah, but also in the slow grower part, yeah. So mostly this is our projects in Tanzania, for instance. Biopharma investment 190 million, yeah. And then also Wijaya Karya is for construction. We also have the one in, let's say, most of the what we call it as stable grower here, but also for the slow grower, like in Niger, we have constructions underway now, some public project, yeah. And most of our investment or trade in here is more on the pharmaceutical, yeah, like vaccines or biopharma is the one that now working together with Sinovac China to produce like COVID-19 vaccines. So this is more or less we see things. And last of my presentation is that we see also connectivity is very important. Yes, all the number here is the number of logistic performance index. Yeah, Indonesia is 3.15 and South Africa is even higher than us, 3.30x. So this is a perfect thing that we at least we have some connectivity of sea connectivity from ASEAN into southern part of Africa. Well, of course, the main road is in here. You have all the big number, yeah, but this one is not only pioneer, but this is very much potential in the future that we can develop more connectivity between the center of growth in East Asia and southern part of Africa, and then all the way to Latin America. So all this number here matters, and we really keep an eye on this. And then now we start doing deeper study to see what kind of investment we can possibly have in South Africa, for instance. And this is one of the calculation. We use this mathematical formula, but we are not going to discuss this today. But the result is this. We have a lot of potential on the uncoated paper, sodium hydroxide, yeah, and then irons or stainless, yeah. So this all the potential that we might in the future or near future develop together with Africa in terms of possible investment. So we are working together with Ambassador Salman Al-Farisi and doing this kind of study and to see how we can proceed even more with southern part of Africa, because this is the very stable region, the big economy, mostly in the southern part of Africa, and then considering our possibility to have more connection between Indonesia and ECOWAS, Indonesia and SADC, Indonesia and COMESA, either in form of PTA or FTA or even limited trade deal for some certain commodities, but this is something that low-hanging fruit that the two countries can develop together. I think, Dr. Yu Sanwu, I had better stop here and perhaps you can continue during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pramono. That was very interesting. And I think especially you shared a bit, I think the perspective from an external investor perspective and how the region is being viewed from that perspective. So thank you very much for that. I am now going to hand over to Professor Dirk Coetzee.
Well, good morning to everyone, to the ambassadors, Your Excellencies, to the participants, and to those who have also been part of this discussion. My chapter that I contributed to this book is more historical in nature. It concentrated on the forming of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between South Africa and Indonesia in 1994. And therefore, I look very much also at the role of President Mandela in establishing this. And I think it's a very important case study for all of us of how South Africa entered into the international community again in a formal sense, in a diplomatic sense, and at the same time also broadened its relationships away from the more conventional allies or partners that they have had in the past, before 1990. I think that the early 1990s, and that's the time obviously when this relationship between South Africa and Indonesia was established, that was at the same time the period that South Africa and the South African government had to reconceptualize a very new foreign policy for South Africa. And at the same time, to also visualize South Africa in terms of a new state identity in the international community. So it was a very vibrant period, and at the same time, a time of reconceptualizing, of inventing, in a sense, the relationships between South Africa and many other countries. And that was influenced very much by the political domestic developments, the constitutional negotiations, formalizing the new constitution, as well as setting up a government of national unity and several other aspects. At the same time, it was influenced by the ANC's own diplomatic history, because the ANC had relations with several countries before 1994. And then at the same time, the personality of President Mandela. In the case of Indonesia, I think what one can say, and has been said quite a lot already this morning, is that relationship was in a sense old and new, old in the more historical and in a cultural sense, but at the same time it was also new very much in terms of the new diplomacy, the new political and new economic relationships that were established. President Mandela's foreign policy, and that's not really my idea, it's something which has emerged amongst many international relations scholars, is that it was very much influenced by values, and values like democratization, human rights, conflict resolution, the promotion of the global south that we have discussed this morning quite a lot already, and then multilateralism and also the reform of multilateral organizations. And Indonesia fit, in my view, very much also into this framework of values and issues that confronted South Africa. So there was, in a sense, a convergence that developed at the early stage between South Africa and Indonesia. President Mandela concentrated very much in the two main speeches that I focused on during the time of the 1997 state visits, on common elements, on common factors between the two countries. First of all, that has been mentioned also a lot, is the history, the common history of colonialism, of Dutch colonialism especially, and then at the same time the history of struggle against it. Also the historical cultural links, the fact that there's a commonality in terms of the religion of Islam. Those who come from the Cape will know about it. Food is very much a common factor that is still very prevalent today. And then the contribution of those persons coming from the East to South Africa from the 17th century until today. Then, in a sense, at the same time, what President Mandela concentrated on is a common international positioning between the two countries. The Bandung Conference was the point of departure for that led to the non-aligned movement, to the global south, as we've looked at it now, to the notion of development. The Indian Ocean is another common element that he concentrated on. So in a sense, what he was promoting during that time, and that was a time of almost activism from President Mandela's side, is trying to, for the international community to reconfigure a new international power balance in which the global south of the developing world should be in a more prominent position than in the past. And he saw, because it was just not long after the fall of the Berlin Wall, sort of a new international dynamics, that was the opportune time also to try to promote that type of relations. And South Africa, he wanted to play a very prominent role in it, and Indonesia itself. What he also focused on in his speeches during that time, the late 1990s, was that India, in his view, provided a type of a development model for South Africa also. In the meantime, the notion of a developmental state became quite a popular or widespread reference in South African politics and development economics, and in general in the public debate, similar to Singapore and to Malaysia and South Korea and other countries. So that became a basis also of common interest between the two countries. Then I think something a bit more on a lighter note, in a sense, by taking the emphasis a bit away from the formal relationships, is that President Mandela also demonstrated a synergy that exists between the two countries through his wearing of his shirts, the Batik Madiba shirts that became very much associated with President Mandela. And I think, there was one German student who came to me quite a number of years who actually did a dissertation on President Mandela's shirts. So I think we don't spend enough time on the significance of that. And just a few points with respect to that, which I, in a sense, think symbolizes some of the relationship between the two countries and the contribution that President Mandela has made in that respect, is that by wearing these shirts at formal events, like, for example, at the United Nations and other very formal diplomatic events, he adopted a non-conventional, if you want, or non-Western sort of diplomatic style that he introduced. And what I think is significant as a South African, that he took it from other countries. It's not a sort of a nationalist approach that many of the other persons were well known for wearing a specific type of shirt or dress, is that he actually took it over from other country, and that is Indonesia, but blended it with local designs. And I think that is for me part of the significance. At the same time, and I use a few quotations in the chapter, it actually apparently gave a lot of self-confidence to Indonesian politicians and Indonesian diplomats about wearing their own shirts in more formal circumstances. And in that sense, he actually introduced sort of new diplomatic conventions. And what it also, in a more formal sense, I would say, what happened, it developed a type of a hybrid between the East and Africa. It created also a global appeal. The idea of Madiba shirts became something that was sold all over the world. It's not only a South African issue. And I think, as I said, it moved beyond to simply a nationalist focus to something which created a blend between different traditions. Now, in a sense, also, on the one hand, we talked about many of the positive elements of it, but there were also a few thorny issues in respect with the relationship between South Africa and Indonesia. Right in the beginning, there was the issue about the trading of military weapons from South Africa to Indonesia, and how it related to the human rights conditions and issues, especially during the Suharto administration. The same applied during that time with respect to Turkey and the Kurdish situation, the Middle Eastern countries. And it has not really been, to a significant extent or satisfactory extent, being implemented, the policy as it was intended in the beginning. And then the other aspect that also I guess one can say, was the relationship was used, but it was for a sensitive matter, and that was the promotion of conflict resolution or mediation, diplomatic pressure with respect to Timor-Leste, the situation there, and the combination of policy principles that I referred to earlier on of the South African foreign policy, party interests, because President Mandela referred to the fact that Indonesia supported the ANC in the first election in 1994 in a financial sense, the new diplomatic relations that were established, and the international expectations of someone like President Mandela to assist in difficult situations like Timor-Leste. Those all came together. Unfortunately for President Mandela, the situation didn't sort of assist him in order to lead it to a conclusion. Maybe finally, to conclude my input in this discussion, is the fact that there were 2 state visits in 1997 in about 4 months' time. And I think Ambassador Suklal will be able to assist us in this, but it is, from my experience, a very exceptional situation. Two formal state visits in such a short period, plus the fact that President Mandela went there in 1990 and 1994 also. So within a very short space of time, he went there 4 times to Indonesia. I think gives us an indication of how important was Indonesia for him during that period. At the same time, I think what we can see is that, to conclude, is that the historical factors of that relationship between South Africa and in Indonesia, or South Africans and Indonesia, as well as its status, Indonesia's status internationally speaking, in a sense contributes to a South African foreign policy which is diversifying its focus on the East and Asia, because many people expect that it will be dominated by the South African relationship with China, for example. But the fact that we've heard a lot about it now already this morning, that that relationship with countries like Indonesia and others also received a lot of attention. And I mean, I think it's also a significant point that in 1997, when the state visits happened between South Africa and Indonesia, it was only then that the official diplomatic relations were established with the People's Republic of China. So that all, I think, the significance of that should be determined in a more systematic way. And because most people focus predominantly on South African-Chinese relations and not all these other Asian relations that are, I think, very important to take into account. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Katia, for providing both the historical aspect of the relationship under Mandela, as well as I think the gaps that you've just mentioned now. And I think also importantly, you mentioned about symbolism in the relationship. And I think that still remains important today, because that kind of transcends time in a way when we look at symbolism. I am now going to hand over to Mr. Ibrahim Patel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Selamat pagi, Excellency Ambassador Salman Al-Farisi, Excellency Ambassador Anil Suklal, and the other panelists and guests that have joined us this morning. Let me also recognize the presence of Zainul Abidin, Zainul Kaji, who is the CEO of OCAF South Africa, who have been instrumental in publishing a book that relates the history of the Tuan and the migration of Indonesians into South Africa, and the establishment of the Malay community, and the wonderful history that they have researched and published. So let me also recognize his presence. My presentation or discussion this morning comes more from a practical level. Dr. Sisiwo has given us a very in-depth analysis of the business opportunities and the economy of Indonesia. But having been to Indonesia since 1994, my experience is more on a practical level. The vibrancy of the economy, the vibrancy of the people, impressed me so much that from this time of 1998 financial crisis, the re-establishment of the economy, which was decimated during the 98 crisis, to it becoming in the 2016, 2017, amongst the 6 largest, fastest growing economies of the world, tells us the resilience of the Indonesian economy and the resilience of business. In current times, if we look at total trade between Indonesia and South Africa in 2019, was about 1.4 billion US dollars, with an export from Indonesia to South Africa of around 588 million US dollars. And on the concept, the import from Indonesia to South Africa, the importation by Indonesia from South Africa of 815 million US dollars. In the period of 2020, where we would have thought that economy would have been suppressed and trade would have been suppressed between the two countries. Interesting to note that we are in that 6-month period at a 572 million US dollar total trade, with export to Indonesia from South Africa of around 253 million US dollars, and imports to exports to Indonesia from South Africa of about 318 million US dollars. So trade hasn't really been affected by COVID-19. It has diminished a little, but we don't see the decimation as we would have envisaged with the stopping trade between many countries. To me, the lessons that we could learn out of Indonesia is how Indonesia's focus on developing the SME and the export economy has created the resilience for the Indonesian economy. And it's something that as South Africa, we can incorporate into the development agenda that we have. There are a great deal of opportunities, and I would encourage both South African and Indonesian businessmen and women to look at the opportunities that have been created. South Africa is an entry into a 1.2 billion market. It's the gateway into the African continent, whereas Indonesia gives us entrance into, with the 650 million, with the 250 million population, gives us an entrance, South African companies, an entrance into a 650 million ASEAN potentially consumer market. So the bilateral trade and the opportunities are significant. And I would urge both sides to look at the opportunities that have been presented. The Indonesian government has seen the importance of the Port of Durban, which is the largest and busiest harbor in Africa, providing almost 70% of containerized goods into the Southern African region, and the establishment thereof of the Office of the Honorary Consul gives the importance of Durban to Indonesia, and it's the key to the gateway of the whole of African continent. So I would urge the panelists not only just to consider the economics around it, but also the practical ways in which we can grow the relationship between both countries. And with all our participants, I've seen that there are a number of participants from the Western Cape, from around the rest of the SADC regions. I would urge them to look at the business opportunities that have been presented by the two countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I do understand that Mr. Patel can't join us for the discussion, so I'm aware of that. Thank you for letting me know. I'm going to now hand over to our reviewer, Professor Gabriel Faimau, to give us his take on, I think, selected chapters of the book. Over to you, Professor.
Okay, good morning. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Pretoria, the editors of the book, and contributors of chapters on the publication of Indonesia-South Africa, a South-South partnership in the making. Panelists before me, they focused on the relationship between both countries. My job is reviewing the book itself and pointing out some takeaways that we can have from the book. The publication of this book reminds me of one of Chinua Achebe's proverbs on invisible power. And the proverb goes, and I quote, "When we see a little bird dancing in the middle of the pathway, we must know that its drama is in the nearby bush," end quote. The publication of the book can be metaphorically imagined as a little bird dancing in the middle of the pathway of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa. But as the dancing little bird is launched today, that is the book, what is probably important are the many drummers that have made the book possible on the one hand, and most importantly, those who have paved the ways for the relationship between Indonesia and South Africa. While the book itself has distinguished authors, the content of the book reveals key drummers that make the dance of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa possible. And in this review, I'll point out some key points that contributions in this book have made. Like any book, publication of a book offers two types of history: the history of a book and the history in a book. Obviously, the history of the book is tied to the idea of reflecting the diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa. What I believe is more important is the history in the book. And I am pleased to learn how the editors and contributors of chapters are aware of this when they penned their contributions for this book, as they all confirm that the relations between the two countries go beyond those 25 years of diplomatic relations. As I closely read the history in this book, I believe that the book offers two related stories. The first one is the story of presence and the story of absence. Let me first talk about the story of presence. There is no question that all contributions in this book indeed focus on the story of presence. It might be coincident, but the opening sentences of the foreword written by Ambassador Al-Farisi and the introductory chapter by the editors, Professor Harun and Mr. Arbi, clearly capture the meeting point in the history of the relations between the two countries. Ambassador Al-Farisi wrote, and I quote, "Indonesia and South Africa share an unshakable bond forged on the battlefield of the struggle against oppression," end quote. Similarly, the opening sentence of the introductory chapter by Professor Harun and Mr. Arbi states, and I quote, "Indonesia and South Africa share a similar history of oppression and subjugation under colonial powers," end quote. The experience as well as the memory of struggle and passion have clearly marked the struggle for the solidarity of both countries. Therefore, contributors of this book seem to agree on three phases in the historical relations between Indonesia and South Africa. The first phase, which I can call a religious encounter, a religious cultural encounter, is marked by the struggle of Sheikh Yusuf in the late 1600s against the VOC and his exile with his followers to South Africa's Cape of the Good Hope, popularly known in Indonesia as Tanjung Harapan, in 1693. Sheikh Yusuf and his followers were exiled as they were fighting for freedom against the colonial power. As contributors of this book underline, in the Cape, they spread Islam and introduced some Malay words into Afrikaans. The Cape Malay community is a living witness of the religious cultural ties between Indonesia and South Africa. The second phase, which we can call political consciousness phase, and this is marked by the common solidarity of Asian and African countries embodied in the Asia-Africa Conference held in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. As noted by both Ambassador Faisal and Ambassador Fisher in their contributions in the book, At this conference, the ANC sent its representatives, and the delegation's table was decorated with its own South African flag. Moreover, through this conference, Indonesia confirmed not only its political support to the progressive forces in South Africa, but also provided financial backing to the ANC in support of its campaign and struggle for freedom. The third phase may be characterized as the dawn of hope or the birth of a shared vision. This phase began with the establishment of the diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa 25 years ago. Like any diplomatic relation, it is the substance that matters most. To this end, many chapters underline the important role played by President Nelson Mandela, not only at the diplomatic level, but also at the level of influencing the Indonesian public perception of Africa and the global perception of Indonesia. While the former reflects the respect that Indonesians have on President Mandela, the latter embodies President Mandela's personal ties with Indonesia through the fashion diplomacy or the Madiba shirt. This was profoundly captured in the chapter by Professor Kotze, as he wrote, and I quote, "Indonesia was responsible for a very important characteristic of President Mandela's appearance in the form of the Madiba batik shirts," end quote. The substance of the diplomatic relations between Indonesia and South Africa is clearly highlighted in all chapters, among others, on the political and diplomatic relations in part 1, event and institutions in part 2, economics and trade in part 3, and non-state actors in part 4. Overall, these sections and chapters highlight remarkable partnership efforts between the two countries and pave the way to the making of a strong South-South partnership between Indonesia and South Africa. What I've reviewed is the story of presence, namely the presence of historical ties, current partnership, and vision of a South-South partnership in the making. How about the story of absence? Although very brief, and I believe Professor Harun has talked about this, the editors of the book capture the story of absence in the introductory chapter by posing the following questions, critical questions. Why have scholars in both countries neglected to research and assess these two countries' political and economic relations? Who should be blamed for not having undertaken the necessary studies that show the developments and outcomes on different levels? And the last question, and where are the institutions that should have taken up these significant challenges? I think all the questions posed here, they actually talk about the story of absence, particularly the production of knowledge on the relationship between the two countries. Production of knowledge is indeed at the heart of the socio-political relationship, including diplomatic ties. The production of this book is probably not only meant as a way of commemorating the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries, but also a step towards enhancing the production of knowledge resulted from the long historical ties and partnership efforts between Indonesia and South Africa. While the story of presence has been regularly told, it might be the time to document this presence and develop an analysis that may enrich the partnership between the two countries. Therefore, I am of the view that this book will benefit not only those working in the area of diplomacy, but also those who are interested in understanding the social, cultural, political, and economic relationship between Indonesia and Africa. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for your review, Professor, and some really important points regarding how to get both sides to further engage one another And I think we've seen this also not only in China-Africa relations as well as the BRICS, that state and also I think government impetus and capital and motivation to build the foundation for relations and create the platforms is so important. And the question is how to make sure that relations grow beyond that impetus to have, I suppose, a flow of its own. So now I'm going to move to the Q&A session. I have been collating as much of the questions and comments as I can, both on the chat and the Q&A. You're still welcome to send in if you have anything, but otherwise I think we'll work with the questions that we've received. Lots of comments commending the bilateral relationship and celebrating 25 years. So thank you for that. So what I have done is looking at the questions, I have divided them into two thematic areas. The first that we're going to look at is the economic aspect, as well as if the speakers would like to respond to the reviewers' comments. So I'm going to read through, I have 3-4 questions here that we will go through, and then each speaker will be able to respond, and then we'll move on to the next set of questions. So first of all, Mr. Harun Aziz asks about what the value of two-way trade is. I think Mr. Patel answered that in his presentation, and unfortunately he had to leave us, so please refer to his chapter. If anyone else has something to add, they're welcome to. Secondly, clearly Maketa wants to know what are the economic cooperation opportunities between the countries? Could this not be another way of strengthening relations on the ground? They also talk about Dr. Pramono's presentation and say a special thank you for detailing the economic potential. And they're also keen to hear about the approach to share in mutual development by way of training and investment programs. The next comment question is by Pinky Saptandari from the Center of African Study in Aralanga University. And they congratulate for the book and want to know what important role does non-state actors have for enriching the relationship between both sides. So I think I will start again from Professor Harun, and we'll work our way through the speakers. Over to you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for those questions. I think I'll leave the economics to Dr. Sezo, and maybe I'll just comment on the very last question on the value of non-state actors. I think the mere fact that the connection that exists between South Africa and Indonesia is a peoples-to-peoples dimension, in other words, the religio-cultural dimension, that has generally been overlooked in the IR sort of sector for a number of years, that came to life during the past decade and a half or more. And the value basically is that it is an area where people have been under the radar screen, made connections, familial connection, communal connection, and even business and tourism of sorts, but in different ways that have not been picked up by the diplomatic sector or acknowledged as it should by that particular sector, because it does have a story to tell. It has a story to tell about enslavement. It has a story to tell about the exchange of cultures. It has a story to tell about language diffusion. It has multiple stories. And these stories have been captured in small ways. For example, we have the Afrikaans language that basically developed in the sort of 19th century and sort of even earlier for that matter. And we find lots of words that are still very much used, of course slowly dying out, but have been used in the community. And that is an indication to what extent non-state actors, to put it that way, have left legacies that have not been acknowledged. Of course, our communities now, academia and non-academia, have realized that input, and we're trying to rewrite, so to speak, not the wrongs, but rewrite the absent that Professor Gabriel sort of eloquently spoke about, the absent histories and social histories that we need to capture. And it is that where the value comes in. In other words, we must realize that value lies in culture, value lies in language, value lies in exchange of all of these. And you can only give a holistic understanding and enrich understanding if we bring on board all of these. And I think this is where non-state actors, and of course I just dealt with certain dimensions, but one can explore this sort of in much more detail at some other level. But those are some of my sort of immediate thoughts.
Thank you. Dr. Pramona, over to you.
The mic.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wu. I think economic relation is important to fill in the distance between the two countries. Yeah, this is unique that historically we have a very strong ties in the past. Yeah, if we look at the all of the old kingdom, for instance, in Indonesia, the Sultanate in Demak or Sultanate in Cirebon, they're always artifacts from Africa, not as a gift in the past, but as a merchandise. Yeah? So it shows that the economic ties between the two part of the world is very important in the past. Now, we move to a new era of the millennial generation, so they make things as even more possible. So, for instance, 40% of the diplomat in the Indonesian Foreign Ministry now is from the millennials, yeah, and they are now entering the leaderships of the ministries. Yeah, what I meant by millennial is those who were born from 1980 to year 2000. After that, we have Z generation. So now they are at the age of between 20 to 40. Yeah, so they're already in the decision-making part of the ministry. So this is very important, and they are pretty much globalized. Yeah, unfortunately now we have the deglobalization because of the COVID, but I still believe that this the soul of the millennial generation is going to make us the two generation from Africa, from Indonesia closer. So the kind of economics that they are really measuring with, mostly on the e-commerce. So, for instance, now we have Gojek in Vietnam, and now we are promoting Tokopedia in America and Latin America. This is far, in terms of distance, is far away. But just remember, BRICS is among very distant countries. We have China, South Africa, and then we have Russia, and then India. Yeah, so it's very distant country. If we remember the story of TPP, start with the P4, yeah, so Brunei, and then Singapore, and then New Zealand, yeah, and one Latin American country, if not mistaken, it will be Chile, or but it's from South America. So Indonesia is the new market and new place for startup. Yeah. So if the two startup can even talk to one to the other together, it will be good for the younger generation. So P2P and business should be in one concerted effort. So I am happy that I think last year or 2 years ago, we also sponsored the establishment of the African Studies in Erlangga University. And this is, I think that we keep doing so. We would like to have more African studies in many universities as possible in Indonesia, specializing on economics, specializing on cultures, on technology, and so on. So I believe that the distance should not be the obstacle for the economic relation between the two countries.
Thank you very much. Professor Katia, would you like to add anything?
Thanks very much. I would just also mainly concentrate on the non-state actors question. I think the other persons who are more involved on the diplomatic relations can do the talk about the economic and trade relations. being at the university in the first instance, I think if I look at my own environment, there's very little contact actually between South African universities. I think certainly in my area and Indonesia. No, I think there's a rich potential for much closer relationships at the university level, at an academic level, at the research level. We've heard about the absences, those aspects that are not discussed or absent in terms of this relation, and one of it is knowledge sharing, knowledge and research work, and so on. So I personally would say that is something which can be done and should be promoted. Someone referred to the book that was published by my university recently on the writings of Sheikh Yusuf. That's one good idea or example of the type of interaction that can take place. At maybe not so much a non-state level, but a sort of a state, but not in terms of formal relationships, diplomatic relationships. Now, something which has happened in the past often is when it comes to training of young diplomats, is that in the case of, on the South African side, for example, diplomats from other countries have come here and sort of shared in the training process. I'm not sure whether that happens at the moment. My impression is that it doesn't happen so much. But I think that in itself, when diplomats at the early stage of their career can meet each other, they can develop networks, they can start to develop even friendships to some extent. It creates a relationship at the personal level, which ultimately over time can develop into something really important. Some call it soft diplomacy, some call it developing of almost ambassadors for your own country in other countries. It works also in the military. In the past, it has been done. And I think from a South African point of view, it is something which should receive much more attention. I don't know if Ambassador Suklal is still here, but like our Foreign Service Institute, I think personally, will have to develop more of a vision about how to also incorporate and make this develop this type of networks with countries that South Africa has a special relationship with. I think there was also reference to Afrikaans. I'm myself Afrikaans speaking. There are many words that we are using that actually is a sort of an adaptation or is very close to some of the words from the East. You know, we think about blakyang, for example, for chutney and for booti and all sorts of things. And at the literature level, at the level of literature, I think there's also opportunity for the two countries to come closer with their different literature traditions together by trying to find what are the commonalities in between them. So again, from a literature, research, academic point of view, I think there's many opportunities that we can develop beyond the sort of more traditional diplomatic and trade relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Professor Faima would like to say something briefly.
Okay, thank you. I'll be very brief. I'm also talking about the non-actors, non-state actors here. And particularly, I want to focus on the politics of public perception. I like it when the chapter of Professor Kutse, he was saying that for many South Africans, Indonesia is not well known. The same actually applies in Indonesia, that for many Indonesians, South Africa is not really known. I still remember I was completing my undergraduate degree in philosophy when President Mandela first visited Indonesia. And I think the visit actually changed a kind of public perception of Indonesians on Africa, because by then, the Africa we knew, that was the Africa depicted on our TV screens. And I think the same applies till today as we speak. So I think the politics of public perception will also help us in terms of how Indonesians actually perceive Africans and also how South Africans actually perceive Indonesians. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I have another set of questions that I have collated. These are more specific to the link between people and history. I'm not sure if some of the speakers will be able to answer this. I think it's quite specific, but I will just raise them, and just any apologies if there's any mispronunciations. So the first question, I think it's from Salamat. They want to know, were the Malay Cape banished and exiled at being, and I suppose being forced into enslavement at the Cape of Sorrows? I don't know if this is something Professor Haran would be able to answer. Muhammad Hartley wants to know, I think they make more of a comment here that there's only one family, namely the Rakib family, that have successfully traced their family lineage to Tidor. But there are many families in Cape Town that have in their possession handwritten Jawi manuscripts. But our local leaders, which is not Melayu Asal, does not want to pursue to unite families in the Republic of Indonesia after 350 years of separation. I think this comment does link back to Professor Haran's point about the relationship, that it's not, I think it's a lot more complicated, both regards to the community in South Africa and also society in Indonesia, that it is not just one culture and community, and there are complexities on both sides, and we need to be sensitive to that when covering this topic. And I'm not sure if Professor Coetzee would be able to answer this, because someone asked here, did Afrikaners pay any repatriations to the Malay people from Indonesia for their forced enslavements? I know that he did focus on historical diplomatic links, so that's, I'm not sure, but I'm going to put it out there. And then lastly, I have a question to the panelists. I think we've heard some of you mention this, but perhaps you could also identify new areas of exploration or possible gaps for next generation academics to pursue, as well as maybe if you see gaps in the practical relations where you think that we should be focused on. So I'm going to now start with Professor Coetzee, if that's okay, and we'll reverse the order.
Thanks very much, Chair. With regard to that first question, I'm not very much sort of sure about how, if I can answer it, about repatriation and payment of repatriation. I'm not aware of any form of repatriation paid. I'm also not aware of a sort of a major repatriation process that took place. But I mean, unfortunately, this is not really a field in which I've done any research, or I'm very much sort of up to date with. So there might be some other information that I'm not aware. But as far as I can say, I'm not aware of anything that has been done in that respect. It's with respect to slavery in general in South Africa. That is another component which there's lots and lots of work being done, research work by historians, especially in the Western University of the Western Cape and other parts about that. So we are starting to get more and more information, better sort of representations of that part of history. But I'm not an expert in that field, so I unfortunately won't be able to tell you about the detail of what has emerged in recent years. But that is certainly becoming as part of history as a discipline in South Africa, a much more prominent part of research work that is being done than what it was in before 1990, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pramono, over to you.
Mute.
Yeah, people-to-people contact, especially among the youth, I think is very important because we see that the trajectory of the world, 2030, for instance, 10 years from now, it's only in our case two times general election. Yeah, so and suddenly we have the newcomers in the global economy. Yeah, in the past, we understand yes, everything is pretty much from the decolonization and the Western power and so on. But then we have a new rise of the continent, both in Asia or in Africa. China will be, in terms of purchasing power parity, number one, GDP, PPP, and then we have India, United States perhaps number three, and then we have either Indonesia or Turkey, and then we have Egypt and so on. So the point is that now we have the global economy that will be led in terms of aggregate by developing countries. Now, the new generation, I think they have the new kind of threat and also potential threat that is totally different with previous generation. Now, the millennial, 2000, they were born in 1980 and until the year 2000. This is the period of AIDS epidemic, pandemic, the AIDS, and until today we don't have any vaccine against AIDS. Yeah, so this is the millennial generation. The first time they were born in 1980, they have the pandemic of AIDS until today, and now they have the experience again when they are coming to the as a leaders of the country. They experience the first, not the first time, but the other pandemic, and that is COVID. Yeah, so for them, working together is a must. Perhaps the term of the security and the United Nations might be changed by the next generation. Yeah, no longer the interstate war is no longer the kind of the things that we know, like horizontal conflict, vertical conflicts, but a pandemic like this. Yeah, and this need a new way of approaching that. And remember, the 2030s, the global economy change, and most of the developing country will be in the forefront of the economic of the world, with all the consequences, because most of the disease like this coming from developing countries. Yeah, so we have MERS from the Middle East, then we have swine flu from the Mexico, and then we still have a lot of pandemics like Indonesia. We until today we still have problem with dengue, yeah, but we will be in the forefront of the economy in 2030. So working together among the younger generation to address the real threat that they are going to face is very important. So I think this will be touch upon the aspect of the economics, cultures, way of life, and also political security, which is totally different from 2020. 2030 will totally different. Yeah, and this is the word of the younger generation that we need to prepare them from now, and they need to have dialogue starting from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pramono. And now I'm going to hand over to Professor Harun. I think you will have the final say as the co-editor of the book regarding the questions. Over to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, well, also because of time, I'm not going to sort of expand too much because there's much to basically say. But let me start with the gaps of research. Being sort of in that area and having my eyes on these areas. For example, one of the areas that we need to really look at, where Indonesian scholars, along with South Africans, should look at archaeology. There are archaeological issues that have never been explored. That basically we are basically both seafaring nations. When you look at sort of at the past, there are drawings that you find in certain areas that connect with what happened in Indonesia. There are some who have been to Indonesian sector in the mountains who basically say similar stories. So archaeology, the issue of DNA testing, for example, is another way. Of course, we heard one of the contributors basically saying that there's only one family, the Rakif family, which is basically true. They have the connection back to the village from where they came, and that is fantastic. But the rest of the community, or the larger part, there's a mixture or roja as such, of sorts. And some would like to find the connection. So genealogical studies need to be really explored as another area. Then we have anthropological studies, sociological studies. I mean, the area is vast. In other words, the opportunity is basically there. That is what Professor Kotse had basically underlined, there's a need for twinning, for universities to get together and twin and take this forward. Of course, we have a large number of universities in Indonesia, and we have a fair number in South Africa, but there are opportunities for getting together, for twinning, and looking at programs and exchanging students. In other words, the University of Stellenbosch, for example, we have one of the chapters speaking about Sheikh Ridwan Rylands, and he's being an advisor at one of the universities in Indonesia, and we were working on a way of bringing students from there to spend a few weeks in the Cape with the hope of exposing them, stimulating them. But these are all opportunities for research and exchange of knowledge, exchange of individuals, but of exchange of academics, of scientists. I mean, the opportunities are just, unimaginable. But we have not explored those, and those are opportunities to really look at. Let me just sort of wind up by saying, when we talk about sort of, as Professor Kutse had already sort of mentioned, there have been lots of research done on slavery and the stories of exiles, but there are individuals, by the way, people like, just to make mention of Ibrahim Salih. Of course, many of you might not know him. He's a historian, former teacher, business person, but has been in lots of archival work that hopefully will be sharing with us more detailed issues pertaining to these aspects of the early history. And so we look forward to those. But it is people like these, and one would assume there are also Indonesian scholars doing the same thing, whom we don't know, who are off the radar screen, who need to be brought on board to work as a team to look at how we can basically open up new avenues of research. So research at different levels in science, in agriculture, I think the list is sort of vast, but we don't have time to basically sort of expand on all of those, but I think the opportunities are there. This book is just a mere taste for what we can do in terms of writing, in terms of sharing, exchanging ideas, and hopefully it lays a foundation for further engagement intellectually, but also in other forms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I do understand that Dr. Suklal had his hand up, and he may have wanted to have put some input. Would you still like to comment?
No, thank you. I know we are well behind time. Thank you for this very stimulating discussion, and I want to express my gratitude to all of the panelists for sharing the views. Just to share some final thoughts. The relationship between Indonesia and South Africa, we've observed and celebrated that it's a solid relationship. But I must say that the strength of the relationship is not just dependent on intergovernment relations. As been pointed out, we need to strengthen people-to-people contact. We need to strengthen interaction between our academics and our academic institution, our research and think tank entities. And we need to strengthen business interaction. As was indicated during the course of discussion, the trade between our two countries is not a testimony to the strong political relation that exists and historical relation that exists between our peoples and our country. And we need to seriously look at why this is the case. At a governmental level, it can't be that South Africa has one embassy in Jakarta for a country of almost 260 million people, of almost 18,000 plus islands. I've been campaigning that we need to increase our presence, diplomatic presence in Indonesia. Of course, given the current economic climate, now is not the time. But going forward, as was also pointed out, by 2030, Indonesia will be the fourth largest global economy in terms of PPP. And that's a fact South African business people should not ignore. You need to position yourself to take full advantage of a massive market. And it's going to be a relationship of mutual benefit. To our academics, the point has been made that we should look at Indonesia setting up an African center. I've lectured at several universities in Indonesia, during my visits. And I've constantly called upon them to look at this seriously. But equally so, which South African university has a dedicated center for Asian studies? Not one, leave alone South Asian studies. We have Confucius centers in many South African universities. We have the Center for Indian Studies at WITS. But we had at the University of Durban Westville, the only university that had a Department of Oriental Studies. But in our democratic era, we closed that down. A great tragedy. We need to call upon our academics in South Africa as well to look seriously at ASEAN, to look seriously at Indonesia. There is not enough twinning. There's hardly any twinning between the universities of Indonesia and South Africa. After 26 years of formal relations, why? There's hardly exchange of academics. There's hardly exchange of students. And I'm putting out a challenge to the academic community and the business community. And we ourselves within government, we have to step up this relationship. It's not where it should be. It's a solid relationship, but it has to be further re-energized and strengthened. We shouldn't take this relationship for granted given the strong historical and political bonds that we have. Complacency shouldn't set in. So I think this seminar needs to bring some of these recommendations to the fore, to the benefit of government, to the benefit of our people, the private sector, and our academics. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So I think that is all the time we have today. If you do have any questions or queries, I do encourage you to please go to the link of the book and read the book that we're discussing today. There is so much rich information that we couldn't cover in its entirety. As Ambassador Al-Farisi mentioned, they welcome comments and your thoughts. So please, please let us know your thoughts on the book. So in closing an event, we all know and can very much sympathize that much of our lives have predominantly existed online the past few months. And it really seems like our attention is required everywhere. And this makes having a person's time and them sharing their thoughts all the more valuable and meaningful. So really on behalf of the Indonesian Embassy, as well as SAIA, I want to say a big, big thank you to everyone, all the speakers and participants for joining us from whichever corner of your country, office, living or outdoor space that you are currently sitting in. And I will then officially close this event and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seswo. Thank you very much, Professor Kotse. Thank you very much, Professor Harun. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, indeed, Professor Gabriel. Thank you, everyone. And then thank you, indeed, Dr. Wu for the moderating this event. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much to you all too. Appreciate it.